There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a man when the people in the room have decided he is already gone. Not the silence of respect, not the silence of tension, the silence of erasure. The kind where someone stops editing their words around you because they have quietly concluded that your feelings are no longer a variable worth managing. Everett Cole sat at the kitchen island of the home he had helped design, in the chair he had sat in every morning for 11 years, with a cup of coffee going cold beside his right hand. And he listened to his wife of 9 years tell her best friend, standing 4 feet away, facing the window, as if he were a piece of furniture she had already mentally donated, that she was finally doing it. "He's not a bad person," Camille said, watching the driveway. "He's just never going to be anything." Her friend Priya made a sound somewhere between sympathy and confirmation. "You gave it long enough," Priya said. "I gave it everything," Camille said. "You know what he did yesterday? He drove to Trenton for a meeting in that car. I didn't even ask what the meeting was about anymore. I stopped asking 2 years ago." Everett did not move. He turned the coffee cup a quarter rotation with 2 fingers, the way he always did when he was thinking. "The thing is," Camille continued, "Aldrich actually shows up. He takes me places. He introduces me to people who matter. He's not hiding in spreadsheets at midnight pretending that something is about to happen." Priya made the sound again. Everett set the cup down. He looked at the back of his wife's head. He looked at the winter light coming through the window. He looked at the messenger notification that had arrived on his phone at 6:47 that morning, the one from his attorney, Franklin Osei, that read simply, "Registered. All filings confirmed. Congratulations, E." And he felt something settle in his chest that was not quite calm and not quite grief, but was somewhere in the precise geography between them. He stood up. He rinsed his cup. He dried his hands on the dish towel folded on the oven handle. He picked up his phone and his keys. "Camille," he said. She turned, mildly surprised, as if she had briefly forgotten he was there. "I'll be at the office." He left. Before we go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy powerful, emotional stories filled with betrayal, secrets, and unforgettable revenge, don't forget to subscribe to Plight Stories, because this story, it only gets crazier from here. The door closed behind him. Not slammed, not dragged. Closed the way a man closes a door when he has already made a decision and sees no reason to announce it. Camille watched the driveway for a moment after his car disappeared. Then she turned back to Priya and picked up exactly where she had left off. She did not know that the man who had just driven away in a 9-year-old Volvo had, as of 6:47 that morning, become the controlling beneficial owner of a $50 billion transaction that would restructure the ownership of one of the largest private equity platforms in the northeastern United States. She did not know that the rival she had chosen, the man with the corner office and the tailored suits and the name in the business section, had been, for the past 3 years, operating a company whose majority equity position was held through a cascade of holding entities that traced back at every level to a quiet LLC registered in Delaware under a name that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. She did not know any of this. She was already planning what to pack first. To understand what Everett Cole had built, you have to go back 11 years, to a Tuesday afternoon in October when he was 31 years old, sitting in a borrowed office in a co-working space in Newark, running models on a laptop with a cracked hinge, and eating a sandwich he had made himself because the good lunch places were an $11 habit he had not yet decided to allow. He had grown up in East Orange. His father had been an electrician. Precise, patient, the kind of man who never touched a wire without knowing exactly where it went. His mother had taught 5th grade for 26 years. They were not poor. They were careful. There is a difference, and Everett had absorbed it so deeply that it had become structural. The way he thought, the way he moved through rooms, the way he evaluated everything before he committed to it. He had studied finance at Rutgers on a partial scholarship and a work-study arrangement that had him in the financial aid office 3 mornings a week. He had graduated without ceremony, without a job offer from a bank, and without a single contact in the industry who had offered to open a door for him. He had spent 3 years at a mid-size asset management firm in Parsippany, learning the interior architecture of fund structures, how capital pooled, how it moved, how ownership could be distributed across entities in ways that were entirely legal and entirely invisible to anyone who did not know the specific filing sequences to look for. Then he had left, quietly, without drama. He had given 2 weeks' notice, returned his badge, and opened a 1-room office with a bank loan his father had co-signed, and a single client, a retired professor named Walter Osei, no relation to his attorney, who had inherited a small commercial property portfolio in Bergen County and needed someone to tell him what it was actually worth and what to do with it. Everett had told him, and then he had shown him. Over the course of 8 years, working from offices that were never impressive and driving cars that were never remarked upon, Everett had built a structure. Not a fund, exactly. Not a firm in the traditional sense. Something quieter and more precise. A layered ownership architecture that used minority positions, convertible instruments, and strategic co-investment agreements to accumulate controlling stakes in companies whose founders believed they were retaining control. He did not take board seats. He did not attend press events. His name did not appear in the business section of any publication. He had been offered profiles twice and had declined both times with a single-sentence email. His attorney, Franklin Osei, Walter's son, as it happened, who had gone to Georgetown Law and built a boutique practice in financial structuring, handled every filing, every entity, every transfer, every quiet accumulation. Camille had not been unaware of all of this. She had been present for the early years, the cracked laptop, the borrowed office, the careful sandwiches. She had believed in him, in the specific and effortful way that people believe in someone when the evidence is not yet visible. She had been warm then, specific. She had left notes on the counter and called him on lunch breaks and told her mother with genuine conviction that Everett was going to build something real. She had met Aldrich Voss at a fundraiser 18 months into Everett's operation, a charity dinner for a children's hospital that Priya had dragged her to when Everett was in Philadelphia, closing a co-investment agreement, and couldn't make it. Aldrich had been at the table to Camille's left. He was 38, broad-shouldered, fluent in the specific vocabulary of wealth performance, the right restaurants, the right references, the right way of suggesting without stating that he was a person of consequence. He ran a private equity platform called Voss Capital Group. It had offices on Park Avenue, it had a website with tasteful photography, and a team page with 8 names on it. It had, by every outward appearance, the texture of success, the weight, the shine, the confident geometry of a company that had arrived. What it did not have, what Aldrich Voss had never looked for, because the question had never occurred to him to ask, was clarity about who actually held the majority of its founding equity. That question had an answer. It had always had an answer. The answer was in a Delaware filing from 4 years earlier, buried in a cascade of holding entities, and it resolved, at every level, to a name Aldrich Voss would not have recognized. Cedarline Capital Partners, LLC. Cedarline was Everett's. Aldrich didn't know. His attorneys hadn't found it, his investors hadn't found it, Camille certainly hadn't found it. And why would she? She had long since stopped asking what the meetings in Trenton were about. What she had found, instead, was a man who showed up. Who had a car she approved of, who introduced her to people she wanted to know, who made her feel, at dinner tables and in photographs and in the quiet arithmetic of social comparison, like she had chosen correctly. By the time Everett noticed the shift, the slight tilting of her attention, the way her sentences about Aldrich had moved from admiring to proprietary. He had already made a decision. Not about revenge, not yet. About information, about patience, about waiting to see what the situation actually was before he responded to it. He had waited 18 months. He had watched his wife grow progressively less careful about what she said in front of him. Not from cruelty, but from a gradual, ambient conclusion that he was not the kind of person whose witness needed to be managed. He had made no move. He had changed nothing. He had continued driving to Trenton. He had continued eating the sandwiches. He had continued running the models and filing the documents and accumulating with the quiet precision of a man who understood that everything worth having is built slowly and confirmed with paperwork. And then, at 6:47 on a Thursday morning in February, Franklin Osei had sent him a single text. Registered. All filings confirmed. Congratulations, E. The $50 billion deal had not been Everett's personal wealth. It had been the formal, legal, registered consolidation of a transaction that had been years in the making. The acquisition of Hargrove Partners, one of the largest mid-market private equity platforms in the Northeast, by a consortium whose controlling beneficial interest traced back through Cedar Line Capital Partners and 2 co-investment vehicles to Everett Cole. Voss Capital Group was one of Hargrove's portfolio companies. Aldrich Voss, by virtue of the transaction now filed with the registrar, worked for Everett. He did not know this yet. He would find out at 11 o'clock that morning, at the event he had spent 6 weeks planning, a boardroom gathering at the Park Avenue offices, 40 guests, journalists on a credentialed list, champagne already poured, a formal presentation designed to celebrate Voss Capital Group's independence and growth trajectory, and to announce the launch of a new $2 billion fund. Everett drove to his office in Newark. He parked in the same spot he always parked in. He bought a coffee from the cart on the corner. The same cart, the same order, the same quiet nod to the same man who had been there for 7 years. He sat at his desk. He opened his laptop. He read through the filing documents one more time, the way a craftsman checks a finished joint, not because he doubts the work, but because the habit of verification is how the work stays clean. Then he sent one text to Franklin. Let it run. Everett had never told Camille about Cedar Line. He had never told her about the Hargrove position. He had never explained, in any of the 11 years they had shared a kitchen and a bed and a specific quality of morning silence, what the meetings in Trenton had actually been about. This was not deception, or rather, it had not begun as deception. It had begun as something quieter and more personal, a desire that he had never fully articulated even to himself, because articulating it would have required admitting how afraid of it he was. He had wanted a life that was not organized around what he owned. He had watched, in the early years of his career, how money changed the texture of relationships, how it made people perform versions of themselves that were slightly off, slightly tilted toward the gallery, slightly louder than genuine emotion required. He had watched people who loved each other genuinely become, over time, people who loved each other's position. He had seen it happen to careful people, to smart people, to people who had started with real warmth and had gradually, without noticing, replaced it with something more legible and less true. He had wanted to know, needed to know, with the specific hunger of a man who had grown up watching his father check every connection before he touched a switch, whether what he had with Camille was real in the way that mattered, whether she was there because of him or because of what she had decided he might eventually become. He had hidden the architecture of what he was building, not to trap her, not to test her. He had hidden it because he was genuinely afraid of what a life organized around money would do to the specific quality of the thing they had, the notes on the counter, the calls on lunch breaks, the genuine conviction she had once expressed to her mother about what he was going to build. He had been afraid that if she knew,
the warmth would become something else, something that looked identical from the outside and felt entirely different from inside it. As it turned out, the warmth had become something else anyway.
Without the money, without the reveal, just through the ordinary friction of years and the slow gravitational pull of a man who drove a better car and said the right things at the right tables. He had sat with this knowledge for 18 months. He had not hardened around it. He had simply absorbed it, the way his father had absorbed bad news, by going quiet, by measuring twice, by not touching anything until he understood exactly where the current was running. The day Camille left was not a surprise. He had been watching it approach with the same steady attention he brought to everything else. He had not tried to stop it. He had not made a final plea or engineered a confrontation or given her a reason to stay that might have worked temporarily and broken completely later. He had simply been present, at the kitchen island, with the coffee, while she told Priya she was finally doing it. And then he had left for the office, because there was work to do. There had always been work to do, and the work was about to become very visible. The Voss Capital Group event began at 10:30. Aldrich had spent 6 weeks on it. The invitations had gone out on embossed cardstock. The guest list included 3 journalists from financial publications, 2 managing directors from institutional investors, a city council member who had been cultivated for 2 years, and 14 of Aldrich's closest professional contacts, people whose presence in the room was designed to signal, without stating, that Voss Capital was the kind of operation that attracted this quality of witness. Camille was there. She had moved 3 boxes to Aldrich's apartment that morning, the same hours during which Everett had driven to Newark and sat at his desk and sent Franklin a 2-word text. She had arrived at the Park Avenue offices at 10:15, in a dress she had bought specifically for this event, and she had stood at Aldrich's side in the way that people stand when they are performing a beginning, slightly too upright, slightly too deliberate, making sure the room registered the configuration. Aldrich opened with remarks. He was good at remarks. The right cadence, the right balance of confidence and generosity, the specific warmth of a man who has learned that rooms respond to being made to feel included in someone else's success. He talked about the journey of Voss Capital. He talked about independence. He talked about the new fund, the $2 billion vehicle that was going to define the next chapter. He thanked his team. He thanked his investors. He thanked the people in the room for being part of something that was, he said, just getting started. The champagne was poured. The applause was genuine. Camille watched from the side of the room and felt the specific satisfaction of a person who has recently made a decision they believe was correct. At 10:51, one of Aldrich's associates, a junior analyst named Kwame, 26 years old, meticulous, the kind of person who checked filing databases before breakfast, because that was simply how he was built, stepped away from the room to take a call. He was back in 4 minutes. He walked directly to the firm's general counsel, a woman named Patricia Strand, and handed her his phone. Patricia read the screen. She read it again. She looked at Kwame. She read it a 3rd time. She crossed the room to Aldrich. She leaned close and spoke quietly, the professional's reflex, the instinct to contain before it spreads. And Aldrich turned to her with the relaxed attention of a man who has been receiving good news all morning and expects this to be more of the same. His expression did not change immediately. The room was still applauding a remark someone had just made. The champagne was still being passed. The journalists were still circling. Patricia showed him the screen. The filing had been registered that morning at 6:47. The formal notification had been processed through the registrar at 10:33, while Aldrich was delivering his opening remarks. The consolidation documents for the Hargrove transaction were now public record. The controlling beneficial interest of Hargrove Partners, the parent entity that held Voss Capital Group as a portfolio company, was confirmed as Cedar Line Capital Partners, LLC. The filing included, as required by disclosure regulations, The identity of Cedar Line's managing member, Everett Nathaniel Cole. Aldrich read the name. He read the address, a suite in a building in Newark he was almost certain he had driven past. He read the transaction date. He read the equity percentage. He read it the way a person reads something that cannot be right, systematically, looking for the specific detail that will reveal the misunderstanding, and finding instead only confirmation stacked on confirmation. He looked up. The room was still in motion around him. Glasses raised, conversation flowing, the pleasant ambient noise of 40 people who had come to celebrate something and had not yet been informed that the thing they were celebrating had already changed ownership. Camille was looking at him from across the room. She had noticed the conversation with Patricia. She had noticed the stillness that had come over him afterward, the particular kind of stillness that is not composure, but the physical shock of a system encountering something it has no protocol for. She made her way to him. "What happened?" she said quietly. Aldrich looked at her. He looked at the phone in his hand. He looked at the room, the journalists, the managing directors, the city council member, all the carefully assembled witnesses to his arrival. "Someone," he said slowly, "owns my company." Camille looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Aldrich said, and his voice was very controlled in the specific way that voices become controlled when the alternative is audible, "that I have apparently been operating a company that was majority owned by someone else, and I did not know it, and that someone else's name just appeared in a public filing." Camille felt something shift beneath the floor of her certainty. A small movement, tectonic, barely perceptible. "Who?" she said. Patricia, standing just behind Aldrich, had the phone still in her hand. She held it out. Camille took it. She read the screen. She read the name. She stood very still. The applause in the room had died down. Someone was asking Aldrich a question. One of the journalists had moved closer, pulled by the specific gravity of a conversation that had changed register. Camille read the name again. Everett Nathaniel Cole. She looked at Aldrich. She looked at Patricia. She looked at the filing date. The same morning she had stood at the kitchen window and told Priya she was finally doing it. 6:47. 40 minutes before, she had called the car service, while Everett was rinsing his coffee cup, while she was planning what to pack. One of the journalists, a woman named Sasha Ferreira from a financial trade publication, who had arrived with a press credential and a habit of reading public filings on her phone between events, had already found it. Sasha had been cross-referencing the announced fund structure against existing registrations and had pulled the Hargrove consolidation as a matter of routine. She had read it. She had understood what it meant. She had looked across the room at Aldrich Voss with the expression of a person who has just been given a better story than the one she came for. She raised her hand. "Mr. Voss," she said, "can you comment on the Hargrove consolidation filed this morning? Specifically, the beneficial ownership disclosure?" The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when a question has arrived that nobody was prepared to answer, and everyone is now paying close attention. Aldrich looked at her. He set his champagne glass down on the nearest surface. "We're," he said, and stopped. "We're reviewing the documents." "The documents appear to indicate," Sasha said, with the measured patience of someone who has done this before, "that Cedar Line Capital Partners holds the controlling equity position in Hargrove, and that Hargrove holds Voss Capital Group as a portfolio company. Is that your understanding of the current structure?" The room was completely still. Aldrich said nothing. "Do you know who Everett Cole is?" Everett was at his desk in Newark when Franklin called. "It's in the room," Franklin said. "I know," Everett said. "Ferreira's there. She found it in under 20 minutes. I expected faster." There was a pause. Franklin, who had known Everett for 9 years and understood the texture of his silences, waited. Camille was there, Everett said. Franklin said nothing for a moment. Then, "You knew she would be." "Yes." "Do you want me to?" "No," Everett said. "I don't want anything done." The filing does what it does. That's all this ever needed to be. Franklin was quiet again. "How are you?" he said, finally, in the register of a question that means something different from its words. Everett looked out the window of his office, the same window he had looked out of for 8 years. The parking lot below, the industrial block beyond it, the kind of view that nobody would ever photograph or describe as aspirational. "Fine," he said. "I'm fine." He meant it. Not as performance, not as suppression. As a plain statement of condition, accurate and complete, he had not been fine for 18 months. He had been careful. There is a difference. But this morning, the filing confirmed, the structure complete, the work done exactly as it was always going to be done. He was, in the specific and uncomplicated sense of the word, fine. He had never needed Camille to be present for this moment. He had never staged it for her. The filing was not designed to reach her at a party or a boardroom event or any particular location. It was designed to be filed correctly. What she did with the information once it found her was her own calculation to make. He was not there to watch it. He had never intended to be. He hung up with Franklin and opened his laptop and continued working. At 11:43, Camille sent Everett a text. It said, "We need to talk." He read it. He set his phone face down on the desk. He continued working. At 12:07, she called. He let it ring. At 12:34, she appeared at the front entrance of his building, the co-working suite in the converted industrial space in Newark, the address on the filing, the address that had been on the filing for 8 years and that she had never once visited, never once thought to look up, never once asked him to describe. The receptionist, a young woman named Denise, who had been there for 4 years and who understood, with the professional instinct of someone who has watched a lot of things happen in a front lobby, that this was not a scheduled appointment, called up to Everett's office. Everett came down. He did not make her wait. He did not make a point of it. He came down the way he came down for everything, with the same quality of unhurried attention he brought to all his movements. She was standing near the entrance, in the dress she had worn to Aldrich's event. She had her phone in her hand. She looked, in the specific way of someone who has just had their understanding of a situation restructured without warning, like a person who is trying to recalibrate very quickly and finding the math more complex than expected. "Everett," she said. "Camille," he said. There was a pause. The lobby was quiet. Denise had become very interested in her monitor. "Why didn't you tell me?" Camille said. He looked at her. He looked at her the way he looked at everything he was evaluating, steadily, without hurry, without the performance of emotion. "Because," he said, "I wanted someone who was there before any of this existed, and I needed to know if that was what I actually had." The sentence cost him something to say, not in the way of self-pity or accusation, in the way of a man reading aloud from the most honest document he owns, knowing that the reading changes nothing but the record. Camille looked at him. Whatever she had come to say, the argument she had assembled in the car, the questions she had rehearsed, seemed to rearrange itself in her mind and then fail to arrive in any useful order. "I left this morning," she said, finally, not as a challenge, almost as a question, almost as if she were confirming the fact for herself. "I know," Everett said. "The same morning." "Yes." She looked at him. He looked back. "Everett?" "I have a 2:00, he said. Not unkindly, not coldly, simply accurately. "Take care of yourself, Camille." He went back upstairs. She stood in the lobby for a moment. Then she walked back out through the glass doors into the February cold, and the door closed behind her with the same quiet precision as the one that morning. And Everett was already at his desk before the sound of it finished. 6 months passed. Aldrich Voss's announcement event had generated more coverage than he had planned, though not the coverage he had intended. The financial press had run the Hargrove story for 3 days. The beneficial ownership disclosure had been picked up by 2 national outlets and 1 podcast with a significant following in the private equity community. Aldrich's name appeared in all of it, correctly positioned not as the subject of a scandal, but as the principal of a firm that had apparently been operating for years without full understanding of its own equity structure, which was, in the estimation of most observers, either embarrassing or alarming, depending on their tolerance for that kind of oversight. The $2 billion fund launch had been quietly shelved. The institutional investors who had been present in the room had, over the subsequent weeks, requested meetings that were rescheduled twice and then not rescheduled at all. 2 of the journalists who had been there had written pieces that were not unkind, but were precise in a way that produced a particular kind of professional humidity, the sense of air going out of something that had relied on perception more than substance. Aldrich's Park Avenue offices remained. His team remained, though 2 of the 8 names on the website had been replaced by mid-July. He continued to work. He was not ruined in any dramatic sense. He was functioning, operational, present at his desk every morning. But the specific quality of the room he had been building for himself, the texture of arrival, of consequence, of being a name that opened the right doors, had changed. Not disappeared. Changed. The way a room changes when someone has quietly rearranged the furniture in the night, and you cannot immediately identify what is different, but you know with certainty that something is. Camille had spent the first 2 months in Aldrich's apartment in a configuration that was technically what she had chosen, but had lost, in the reconfiguration of his public profile, some of the specific gravity she had been orbiting. The introductions to people who mattered had slowed. The dinners at the right restaurants had continued, but felt slightly different. The same rooms, the same tables, but with the subtle shift of an audience that had recalculated something about the person she was accompanying. She was not unhappy. She was not destitute. She was living the life she had chosen, in the company of the man she had chosen, in a city that had recalibrated its understanding of him slightly downward, while simultaneously recalibrating its understanding of her ex-husband considerably upward. The profile that ran in a national business publication in April, a long piece about the Hargrove consolidation and the architecture of the deal, described Everett Cole as one of the most methodical deal-makers in private equity, a man who had spent a decade building an ownership structure of considerable sophistication while remaining essentially invisible to the industry he was restructuring from within. There was a photograph, Everett at his desk in Newark, in the same office, in a flannel shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, looking approximately identical to every other day of the past 8 years. The article ran 4,200 words. It mentioned his name 41 times. It mentioned his address, the Newark suite, in the second paragraph, as a detail meant to convey something about the nature of the man. It mentioned his car. It did not mention Camille. She read it on her phone, alone, on a Tuesday morning, while Aldrich was on a call in the other room. She read it from beginning to end. She read the photograph caption. She read the quote from a managing director at a Boston-based fund who described Everett as the kind of operator whose most significant quality is that you don't see him until the work is already done. She set her phone down. She did not call him. She understood, with the specific clarity available only to people who have recently made an irreversible decision and are now living inside its consequences, that there was nothing to call about. The filing was filed. The work was done. He had gone back upstairs. He was not waiting for anything from her.
He had never been waiting for anything from her.
She understood this now in a way she had not understood it while she was standing in the lobby in her event dress, that his steadiness had never been passivity, that his silence had never been absence, that the man she had categorized as someone who was never going to be anything had been, the entire time, doing exactly the thing he had always been doing, with exactly the quality of attention he had always brought to it. She thought about the notes she used to leave on the counter. She thought about the calls on lunch breaks. She thought about the specific warmth of what they had had in the beginning, before the geometry of the rooms she wanted to be in had begun to rearrange her priorities. She did not think about this for long. She was not a person who indulged extended retrospection. She was practical, and practical people move through the inventory of their mistakes with efficiency, cataloging rather than dwelling. She cataloged. She moved on. Everett was at his son's school play in May. Isaiah was 8, and he was playing the role of a cloud, a speaking cloud, with 2 lines delivered from a step stool in the center of the gymnasium stage, and the kind of absolute concentration on his assigned function that Everett recognized with the specific recognition of a man seeing his own essential quality reflected in miniature. He sat in the 3rd row. He had arrived 7 minutes early. He had his phone in his jacket pocket on silent, and he did not take it out. He watched his son deliver both lines with the gravity of a person for whom the task at hand is the only task in the world, and he felt, in the clean, uncomplicated way of a man who has resolved his unfinished business and returned to the only things that had ever actually mattered, something adjacent to contentment. After the play, Isaiah found him in the hallway and grabbed his hand and asked if he had seen the part where the other cloud had said his line wrong, and Everett said he had seen it, and Isaiah said it was fine because the other cloud had been nervous, and you had to be patient with people who were nervous. And Everett said that was exactly right. They drove home in the Volvo, the same Volvo, the one Camille had described while he was 4 feet away as evidence of a man who would never be anything. He pulled into the driveway. He turned off the engine. He sat for a moment in the quiet of the car, with his son already unbuckling and talking about whether a cloud could theoretically have a pet. And he felt the full, specific, sufficient weight of everything he had. This car, this driveway, this conversation, this 8-year-old untangling the theology of cloud ownership. And he was undeniable. Not in the way of headlines or filings or Park Avenue offices. In the way that matters. In the way of a man who built what he built and knew why he built it, and was sitting in the right driveway at the end of the right day with the right person asking exactly the right kind of question. The question had been about clouds. He told Isaiah that clouds probably preferred fish. Isaiah considered this carefully. "That's a good answer," Isaiah said. Everett agreed that it was. There is a question this story leaves in the room when it's over. Not about Everett. His account is settled. Not about Aldrich. His situation is what it is, and what it is fair. The question is about Camille, about the specific quality of the error she made. Because she was not stupid. She was not cruel in the cartoonish sense. She was a particular kind of smart person making a particular kind of catastrophic miscalculation. The kind where you confuse the absence of performance for the absence of substance. She saw a man who drove a modest car, ate sandwiches he had made himself, and went to meetings in Trenton without explaining them, and she decided that she had full information. She had decided that the data available to her was the data that existed. She was not watching carefully enough to notice that the most important things are almost never the things that announce themselves. So the question isn't why Everett didn't tell her sooner. The question is this: how many times have you looked at someone's ordinary life and decided, without evidence, that ordinary was all there was? And how certain are you, right now, that you're not making that same calculation about someone who is, at this precise moment, sitting at a desk somewhere, running models on a laptop, eating a sandwich they made themselves, doing the most significant work of their life in a room that nobody is watching? Think carefully before you answer.